Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chana, Schachter, Duskis, and I lived on the Moshav for 7 years between the years of 1978 and 1988. My sister still lives here, my sister Mimi, and I wanted to share the story of my father's family's escape from the Nazis, which took place between 1938 and 1941. Growing up, I would hear lots of stories, a little story here, a little there, but nothing that was put together on a chronological order from beginning to end, until one day I was sitting having coffee with an old friend of mine, Or Rose, and I told him about my uncle's passing, and he said, I said, only Tante Deborah is left. He said, well, you better go and get those stories down now. So I would go to her every month and hear the stories, and when we put it together, she said to me, you know, I counted. There were 18 miracles that happened during that escape, and if it hadn't been for any one of those, we wouldn't be here. So thank God I'm here, and my 6 kids, and my lots of grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. It's all because of this miracle. So before I start with telling you about my father, I want to tell you just a little bit about his father. His father is Shlomo HaKohen, and there are 3 Duskises named Shlomo Duskis. When he was 16, he and some friends of his talked about their dreams. They wanted to become doctors, but in order to become a doctor and go to medical school in Switzerland, they needed to know how to speak German. And in their house, it was pretty much forbidden. They were speaking Yiddish. So they went to this man who was an apothecary. He was Jewish, and he taught them the basics of German and the basics of medicine. And they were doing that without their parents' knowledge. One day, a telegram came to the Schachter's residence, and they were passing it around. No one could read it. And my grandfather saw it, and he said, Baruch Dayan Hamet. It was a telegram to say that somebody in the family had died, and it was giving them funeral information. And when my grandfather said that, his father looked at him, and even though he was happy that he translated it, he was very upset that he was doing his German, and when he found out about him and his friends, he put an end to that. So that was the end of medical school. But what he learned in that short period of time, learning to speak German and learning about medicine, that helped him with his survival. So we're going to start with, my grandparents lived in Zolta, Poland, and they got married, and my father was born there. When my father was 6 months old, my grandfather was being conscripted to the army. And he didn't want to go and serve because he said, if Jews aren't allowed in the government, then we shouldn't have to serve. And he and his family moved to Vienna. So they were in Vienna, starting their lives, and my father went to a public school. And then after 5th grade, when his parents were finally making it, they were able to send him to a Jewish school. And he was having a foot in both worlds. He would go there during the daytime and then to Hebrew school in the afternoon. And Shabbos, after lunch, he would go to a socialist Zionist youth organization and dance with them. And then he'd go to Agudas Yisrael. So he was like with one foot in both worlds. And when he was about 14, 15, he was in school learning to do weaving. And his parents were in the remnant business. One day when he was at school, he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. And it got worse as the day went on, and finally he just left to go home. He was on the tram going home from school to his house, and he had to stand because Jews weren't allowed to sit on the regular seats. So you can imagine when you're in a lot of pain and having to stand for a long ride. Well, when he got home, his father took one look at him and took him to the Rothschild Hospital, which was the only Jewish hospital with Jewish doctors. And apparently it was appendicitis, and he had surgery that night. The date was November 9th, 1938. That was the night of Kristallnacht. And when he was put into the recovery ward, he was next to a man who was completely bandaged from head to toe. And Gestapo came in and said, this man is faking it, he's not really sick, and he cut open the bandages and cut open the stitches, and the poor man bled to death right beside my father. And then the Gestapos came to his bed, and the doctor who saved him stood at the end of the bed and said, this young man is my patient, and he just had surgery, and he needs to rest. You need to leave. And thank God, for whatever reason, they left.
Miracle number one.
That's number one, is the appendix attack. The doctor saved him, the first time with surgery, and the second time with having the Gestapo leave. So then my grandfather, the next day, went and brought him home, and he knew that he had to leave. He couldn't stay. So before he got a chance to really take care of the situation, they were woken up at 3 in the morning with 2 Gestapo at the door. They had a list, and on the list was Shlomo Schachter. And they were taking all men who were born in Poland and putting them on trains back to Poland, and we know what happened to them at that time. So he grabbed a few things of his and he went. They locked them up in some kind of old building for 3 days, then put him on a train. When he was on the train, he thought, if I get to Poland, that's the end of me, and I won't be able to help my wife and 4 children. But if somehow I manage to get away, either they'll shoot me or I'll manage to get away. So thank God, at the last stop before the border of Poland, and they were checking passports and papers and all of that, he managed to slip away and return to Vienna, sometimes riding underneath, holding onto the rails, or miraculously he made it back. So that was another miracle. When he got back to Vienna, he didn't go home. Why? Because he knew at some point the Nazis were going to check out his house of where he was. And he didn't want his wife to know anything about it because, they would torture it out of her. So he went to his brother-in-law and sister-in-law's house, and they hid him in the basement. That night, the Gestapo came again, stomping up the stairs, waking everybody up and saying, Mrs. Schachter, where's your husband? Where's your husband? She said, I don't know, you took him. You put him on a train. I don't know. And they believed her and they left. The next day she went to her sister's house and she said to her sister, the Nazis came again yesterday, they're looking for Shlomo. And her sister said, now I can tell you, he's been hiding in our basement. So he never went back to his house, and they decided that they would have to leave. So they heard that in Holland, Queen Wilhelmina was letting refugees in. So they went to the border, and apparently the Germans had closed it and they wouldn't let people through, which in a way was another miracle, because later on there was problems, and we all know the story of that young lady who wrote the book, Anne Frank, right? So they went back home, and then they decided that all the men were going to go and try to escape through Belgium, and the women were staying there because they were only taking men at the time. So my grandfather, my father, and his younger brother, and I think it was the grandparents, my father's parents, went to the city closest to the border by Belgium, which is Cologne, and they found some smugglers that they paid a lot of money to that were supposed to take them over. But the smugglers never showed up. So while they were waiting and davening mincha, a man walked by with lots of Leica cameras, which is an expensive item, and he was going to bring them in and sell them on the black market. So they asked, will you take us with you? And he said, well, what will you pay me? And they only had at that point now 10 Deutschmarks, which was not a lot of money, but whatever they had, they gave to him. And they were able to escape. But it wasn't such an easy escape. They had to cross where they had those lights going, and they had to time it to when the lights had stopped, and then they would get under a green blanket and hide, and then they would go. So it took a long time. Thank God they made it through. When they got to the other side, the smuggler brought them to a taxi driver's house. There were 2 taxi drivers, and they were talking with the taxi drivers about driving them to Antwerp. And the taxi driver said, well, what will you give us? And they didn't have any money. So what were they going to give us? They had some jewelry. So they took out the jewelry looky-look thing, and they said, this is only 14 karat, and we only have 18 karat here. And they said, well, we're not wanting to give it to you. We want to get it back. So it was kind of going to just be held like in a pawn shop. Anyways, meanwhile, while they're negotiating, my father, who's all of 16 years old, went over to the corner where these young men, their grandmother was sitting there with her little altar and her pictures, and she was praying. And my father said to her, what do you think your God is going to think if your sons don't take them? And she immediately said to her grandsons, you must take them. And they took them. They left them off in Antwerp in the Jewish area. It was early morning, and they could smell the yummy stuff coming from the bakery, and they were hungry and they wanted to go get something. But before they could get to the bakery, they were stopped by a policeman. And he said, where's your papers? Well, they had no papers. So thank God, this policeman, I don't know, he had a heart of gold. He said, you know, you can go to the city hall and you can get special kind of paper that said they were temporary residents. So he took them there, and they got these papers so that they would be able to walk around a little bit freely. They were there for, I think, about 9 months. They got jobs. The younger boy, who was only maybe 6 at the time, 7, he was sent to live with a Jewish family out somewhere for 3 months. So that was his trauma from the war, being separated from his family. And my father and his father went to work. They worked several different jobs. One of them was in the furrier business. They knew how to sew very well from being in the remnant business, that they were able to get this job in the furrier. And then there was a time that my father actually worked in a diamond cutting business, and it was with Chabadniks, and they would play a shiur, and then they would stop when they had to do the drilling, and they would take turns doing all this. And he started getting turned on to the Chabad with that. So now the men are there, they have an apartment to rent, so now they're able to send for the women. Meanwhile, my grandmother had been back in Vienna sewing sacks and stuffing the sacks with linen, and inside the linen a little jewelry, a little this, a little that, and she was sewing these bags closed and embroidering the address where to send it to on top. And my aunt actually had a slip of paper from the post office, December 31st, 1940, when she sent the bags. Anyways, they had to now escape and cross the border. So they got to Cologne, and they were staying in a hotel. It was my grandmother, my aunt, and my who was maybe 7 at the time, and her sister, who was like 4 or 5 at the time, and the grandparents, her mother's parents. And they started to feel uncomfortable in the hotel because they were being looked at without like a male person there. So they thought they were going to be turned in at some point. So they said, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here soon. And they were told that the walk through to Belgium is very snowy and cold and deep snow and hills. And they didn't think that the little girls are going to make it. So they developed this plan. They're going to put the two girls on a train in Cologne, and they're going to go to Antwerp, and the father's going to meet them in Antwerp, and then the mother and grandmother would come somehow. So she puts the girls on the train, telling the older one, what?
By themselves, they went on the train?
By themselves.
How old
Told the
was the eldest?
7 and 5. Told the 7-year-old, you're responsible for her. Gave them food, put them on the train. Your father's going to meet you in Antwerp. Well, before they got to Antwerp, the train was turned around and sent back. They got back at midnight, so it's dark. Everyone gets out the train and goes home, and they don't know what to do. So they're standing there, and the younger one's crying. She's hungry, she's tired. Meanwhile, a woman had been looking out of her window from across the street, and she came and she said, oh, you can come to my house. I'll give you some hot chocolate. I'll give you a warm bed to sleep in. And so the younger girl gave her her hand and was ready to go. But the older one was pulling her. She's responsible. Does she know, can she trust this woman? Because they did have a nanny for many, many years. And when the Nazis came to power, the nanny turned on them. So she didn't know if she could trust this adult. So the woman said, you know what? Let's go to the ticket master, and I'll write down my address for him, and I'll tell him if a woman comes in the morning, tell her I've got the two girls. So then she felt, okay, I'll come. So the little one has her hot chocolate and goes to sleep, and the older one has to stand guard at the window. So she's sitting at the window like this, and the next thing she knew, somebody was tapping her on the shoulder. It was her mother. She had gotten there and went to the station master and got the address, and they weren't sure they were ever going to see each other again. So now they have to get to Antwerp, and they had to go through Belgium. So while they were walking and getting to the border, it was like a 2-day walk. They saw a farmhouse in the distance, and my grandmother went and knocked at the door and offered the woman some money to feed them and let them sleep there. So they did. And at one point, my grandmother saw that the woman had taken her fur coat and was trying it on. And so she kind of got the creeps from that and wasn't sure if she should trust this woman or not, because if she was looking at her coat, maybe she would turn them into the Nazis. So they slept, but she woke everybody up early, and they left before the woman got up. And they get to the border, and my grandmother goes to the guard, single guard there with a big gun, big boots, and she says to him, can you please let us through? And he said, no, I can't. If I do, they're going to shoot me. So he couldn't do anything about it. Meanwhile, the grandmother went to the 7-year-old girl like this, come here, and she said to her in Yiddish, I want you to go up to the soldier, and when you do speak to him, you're to wag your finger at him and tell him if he doesn't let us through, God is going to get him. Now, this little girl, who's 7 years old, was more afraid of her grandmother than she was of the soldier with the big gun. So she went over to him, and he bent down to listen to what she said, and he said, little girl, please don't curse me. So then he calls over the mother again, and she doesn't know what he's going to do. And he said, look, I can't let you through, but if you go this way and this way and this way, you're going to come to a cabin where there's a man, and I know he takes people through, and he charges X amount for each person, and if you manage to get to his cabin, he'll take you through. And he did, and they ended up in Antwerp. And meanwhile, they were trying to get the paperwork to be able to go to America. And they had gone through the whole process of whatever you have to do to put the application in, and a doctor's thing, and the photos, and this and that. And they were told on a Thursday, come back tomorrow, your visas are going to be ready, you'll be able to go. And they had arranged with a ship to take them. The next day, they went. And the embassy person came out and said, we're closed right now because the Nazis were coming in and they were bombing already. And all the people who were there said they needed to go somewhere. They ended up on the train going to France. But I think they had problems getting in. But my grandfather, he insisted on staying and going back on Monday and going back on Tuesday and thinking they're going to open up the embassy. And when he finally got it through that they're not going to open up, he said, well, we've got to get out of here, because every night they were running down to their bomb shelters, and all of the ships in the harbor were being bombed, so that even if they did have the visas, they couldn't get out on a ship. So what did they do? Oh, they got on a train and they were going to France. Now remember, the first set of people who went to France, I don't know what happened with them, but whatever it wasn't so good. Meanwhile, the Germans were bombing the train in different places, and every time there was like bombing going on, they had to stop, and people would get out of the train and run to the forest, and then when the bombing was over, they'd have to run back and get on the train. Some people just stayed in the forest, and thank God they made it to France. They wanted to go to Paris, but they weren't able to get there. They ended up somewhere near Marseille, and when they got off the train, the soldiers, they were asking for because the internment camp. Now the first internment camp, and they really all tried to stay away from him. They were there for a month, and during that month, the parents were trying so hard to keep kosher that there was very little to eat. And when they went to the next place, they realized they needed to eat more, or that was going to be the end of them. And one day, the soldiers told them, all the men, they were giving them hard labor to do. So he pointed to a field and said, see those rocks in there? Big boulders like the ones we used to have behind? You have to pick them up and move them over there. So they did. And everybody was kind of excited because they thought they were clearing the land that they could plant vegetables and then they'd have some food. But the next day, after bringing the boulders to where they were sent, Commandant said, who told you to do that? Now you dig them up and bring them back and put them back. And my father, who was a Kohen and had a Kohen's temper, was a little bit pissed off, and he took his pickaxe and he hit it on a big rock, and a piece of it chipped off, hit him in the head, and he was down on the ground unconscious. His father starts walking to him to help him, and the Gestapo says, if you go to him, they're going to shoot you. So he couldn't even go to him. My father laid there for about 10, 12 hours until a dog came along and started licking his face and woke him up. And he had headaches and concussion for many weeks after that. So this was the first camp. At one point, they let them go, and they gave them travel papers so that they could go to Marseille to get to the embassy and hopefully get their paperwork to go. And when they got off the train, the paperwork didn't have one stamp on it that it needed to have, so they took them to another internment camp. This internment camp didn't have a cruel commandant, just an inept one. And my grandfather said to the commandant, I'm a chef, I can cook. Would you like me to help in the kitchen? And the commandant said, you go and talk to the cook. If he wants you to help, you can help. If not, not. So he goes to the cook.
This was your grandfather? Your grandfather?
My grandfather, who was never a cook. But if he had to do something, he would do it. So he goes to the cook, and the cook is elated because less work for him. So he gave him two big pots that he could kosher, and my father asked for some vegetables and legumes. He said, I'll even throw in some meat and some bones. He said, no, thank you. The legumes and the vegetables will do. So every day he would make this soup that was given to them for lunch. There were also some Italian prisoners of war, and when they heard about the soup, they would line up in the kosher soup. And so it must have been pretty good. He must have learned how to do things. Another thing he did there was ask the commandant if he could have a pass to go to town and buy some equipment for fixing shoes. He noticed a lot of people were walking around barefoot and getting infections, and, there's no medication there. So his kids also, the soles of their shoes were wearing out. So he bought some of the tools that he would need, and he took old tires, and he cut them, and he put new soles on. So he was able to fix the family shoes, and then people would come to him, and he would be the shoemaker. So he was the cook and the shoemaker. Whatever he had to do, he would do. And we're coming up now to Rosh Hashanah. And for Rosh Hashanah, you need to have a shofar. They didn't have a shofar. So my father, one morning, very early, escaped from the camp and went to town. He went to a butcher, and the butcher saw him in his striped pajamas and said, I'm going to report you. And he thought he was coming to demand meat or something. He said, no, I just want 2 ram's horns and I'll leave. I'm going back to the camp. So he gave it to him. He went back to the camp with the 2 of them, and his father took one and he took the other, and they sharpened a wire hanger, and they were twirling it, cleaning it out so that it would be usable. So my grandfather ended up poking a hole in the side of his, and so it was no good. But he didn't want to upset my father and put him under pressure that they were depending on that one. So he pretended that he was still working on it, and my father finished his, and it was working. So the people heard there's going to be a shofar. And the oldest man came and said, I want to blow the shofar because I'm the oldest man. And then a Rav came and said, I want to blow the shofar because I'm the Rav. And his father wanted to blow the shofar. And my father said, I'm the one that escaped. I'm the one that went to the butcher. I'm the one that bored it out. And I'm the one who's going to blow it. So come Rosh Hashanah time, when it's time to blow the shofar, my father blows the shofar. And the commandant hears this, and he comes out with a gun in one hand and a whip in the other hand and some paper sticking out of his pocket. And he said, what was that? And my father told him in French. He said, I'm blowing the horn of my people's freedom. And he looked at him, and he started to giggle. He said, toot it again. So my father blew it again. Then right after, he pulls out the papers, and he's reading from this list of people who were given passes to be able to go to Marseille and deal with the embassy and get their visas. So they went. They were able to leave. Now the problem was they needed somebody in America who would vouch for them. They didn't want refugees coming in and then being dependent upon America to support them through welfare. So he contacted an old cousin of his, Herman Jungleib, and he agreed readily to do it. Then the problem was they had filled up the quota of people from Poland that were able to enter the country for that year. So Mr. Jungleib spoke to his friend Saul Bloom, who was a senator and well known over there, and he got a special legislation passed giving an exemption for 6 more Polish people to come. And in addition to that, they needed to have the signature of the vice consul in Marseille. And at that time, there was a man, Hiram Bingham IV. Now, Hiram Bingham was instructed by the American government to slow down and not to do signing the visas. Well, he, against order, signed 2,500 visas. One of them went to one of the big artists, I can't remember offhand his name, but there was a Chagall. That's right. Thank you. Okay, so now Hiram Bingham stamps it, and they were able to get on a ship, and it was a 6-week journey, and they were not allowed to get off until they were on American soil. So my Zadie, who was always thinking ahead, stocked up on boxes and boxes of canned sardines and bags of lemons. Lemons and sardines. So every day they would open up one can of sardines, and they'd mash it onto some hard bread or some crackers, and they'd have lemons because of scurvy. So he had some sable to him. And then the girls would go to the cook and sing for him, and then they would reward him either with an apple or an onion. And so they would save the onion for Shabbos, and that was their treat. Cut the onion up and mash it with the sardines. So that was their Shabbos treat. And the thing is, you'd imagine after 6 weeks of eating sardines, my father wouldn't want to see or touch or smell a sardine. He loved sardines. Every Shabbos he had sardines for his Suda Shlishi. Okay, so now they're on the boat, and they're going from place to place to place. And on the boat, my father found a book and taught himself English. And half of them were good travelers, and half of them were seasick travelers. So it wasn't an easy trip. They ended up in Puerto Rico. And when they got to Puerto Rico and they could get off the ship, my grandfather starts looking where he can buy wine and grape juice because Pesach's coming. And matzah. And there was none to be had all over. So he was quite upset about that. What did they eat there? Because they couldn't really eat the food. They ate bananas and pineapples. And one day, my father takes his youngest sister to a park to play. And while they're playing, she says, I gotta go to the bathroom. He didn't know where it was, but he saw a man in a field house a little ways away, and he went to the man, and he asked the man in, I think it was Spanish, like, where's the bathroom? And the man tells him. Then he turns around to his sister, and he tells her in Flemish. The kids knew 4 languages. They knew Yiddish, Flemish, German, and one other one, but they didn't know English. So he told her where it was, and she went to the bathroom. And meanwhile, this man is asking him, like, so what's your story? And he tells him that they're refugees, and they're trying to get to New York, and they want to get to New York before Pesach, which is in 2 days, and they can't find any matzah or wine at all, and that his parents didn't know what they were going to do. So the sister comes back, and the man says, follow me. So he goes with him to the Alcoa Shipping Company. So this man goes in, and everybody's saying, hi Frank, hi Frank, hi Frank, hi Frank. They all knew him. He must have been somebody very important. He parks himself in the vice CEO's office, and he says to him, I need passage for 6 people on the boat that's leaving tomorrow. And he says, I don't have space for them. He said, well, I'm sitting here and I'm not moving till you find it. So miraculously he found it, and my father went home with his sister to the hotel, and he said, we have to start packing, we're leaving tomorrow. And my grandfather thought it was a joke, and he said, it's not funny. And he convinced him finally that this was true, and the next morning they go to the port. And there's this fancy ocean liner, and they go on, and the captain who's taking everybody's names looks at them and says, you don't look like you belong, get off my boat. And they said, but we're on the list. And then my father goes up and says, they put us on last minute, check at the bottom of the manifest, and sure enough, in handwriting, everything else is typed, but in handwriting, they wrote them in. And the man was, the captain was shocked. And now he calls the purser to bring them to their rooms. And they take my father and his younger brother to some little hole in the wall, a little closet that they threw 2 cots in. But they took the parents and the 2 girls inside to the most amazing room ever. And it was probably so expensive that nobody wanted to pay for it. And this Frank, I don't know where he got his Protexia from or what he was able to get that special room for them. And they went in, there was an enormous bed. On one side there was fruits, just all over the place, and flowers, and this was their last 12 hours of luxury before hitting New York. And there's many more stories about more miracles that happened in New York, but this story is called the 18 plus 1 miracles. So what's the plus 1? The plus 1 is something that happened early in the story that had that not happened, none of the 18 could have taken place. So what was it? It was the first time that the Nazis came knocking on their door asking for Shlomo Schachter. Then they looked at their list and they saw there was another person in the family born in Poland, and that was my father. And remember, my father just was coming home from the hospital early after one day of, he had surgery. And I don't know how my grandmother got the courage up, but she went over to the soldiers that were ready to take him and said, please, my son just had surgery. If you take him in his condition, he's not going to make it. And it's not going to be good for you, and it's not going to be good for him. And thank God they left him back. Because had my grandfather had my father to look after this young man who had just had surgery, he never would have been able to slip away and escape. So that was the plus 1 miracles. And there's plenty more miracles that happened when they first arrived, and I'm happy to come back another time and tell those stories.
Thank you. So with all those miracles, because when we look into our own life, we will realize we all go through miracles, because we all are supposed to be here right now. We all are supposed to be in this world, and we all have our task. And the most important one is to help each other. And the most important one is to say thank you, Hashem, for everything you do, for everything you do. Sometimes it's so painful, but when we go through it, maybe one time we will understand it. Even if we don't understand it, thank you, Hashem, for everything that's happening. It's amazing. Amen. Come everybody, Hallel, Hallel.